Over the years, many games have come and gone. While some sing songs of their success, others lament over their downfall. Final Fantasy Tactics: War of the Lions is a game which hovers over the border. Hello everyone, I'm TheKasaPuppy, and let's hop right into Final Fantasy Tactics. Around the time of the hit title Final Fantasy VII, Squaresoft was working on a strategic, almost chess-like idea for a Final Fantasy game. Having similar mechanics to that of Tactics Ogre, it was definitely a jarring step for the Final Fantasy franchise. Most people who picked up this game went in with the hope of another 7, and when the game was completely different, they were confused about the change, but most were surprised and welcomed it. It's not hard to see the charm of this title, but to a new JRPG fan, this game may seem like a deviance to most, until you actually play the game, that is. Now let me note that for this review, we'll be using Final Fantasy Tactics: The War of the Lions edition because of its updated dialogue and small fixes. Final Fantasy Tactics is a complicated story that is mainly told through 2 parts. In the first part, we follow Ramza Beul, a youth caught in a military conflict known as the Lion War. Having learned recently that his family has become corrupted with power over the war, Ramza abandons his name and travels the world as a mercenary. Through this, Ramza takes on a job of escorting Princess Ovelia, a figurehead set to take the throne in place of the prince born to the soon-to-be deceased king. Through certain happenstances, Ramza is met with his old friend Delita, who he'd thought dead due to a conflict between a rebel faction and his own family. However, all is not well as his friend is now working under one of the military factions vying for the throne, and has kidnapped the princess. Ramza wishes to learn of Delita's reasonings for his action, and chases after the princess with a group of sellswords and the princess's guard. Upon finding Delita, Ramza learns that his brother had ordered the assassination of the princess so that the prince would take the throne and then would gain power over the masses. Unable to sit back and watch an innocent be made victim, Ramza takes to the fight and rescues Ovelia. Now having made enemies of the Order of the Northern Sky, Ramza has nowhere to shelter Ovelia, so they make their way to Lionel, where the church accepts Ovelia into their walls and grants her protection. With that settled, Ramza gets involved with a youth named Mustadio, whose father had been taken hostage over an item called the Orosite, a stone of legend said to grant those the power of the gods. Wanting to help, Ramza agrees to go with Mustadio to put a stop to the people who were trying to get the stones for themselves, only to find out that the plan was put in place by the very church that they had entrusted Ovelia to. Frantic, Ramza makes his way back to Lionel and learns of the church's true goal: to gather the Orosite and take over the country, all while pulling the strings behind the war that is currently ongoing. Having learned this truth, Ramza fights against the church, being branded a heretic in the process, and becomes a force that fights against the church and its ambitions. The second part is the story of Delita Hirol, a commoner who was caught in the turmoil of the Beul family. Delita and Ramza were friends since childhood. They met when Barbaneth, Ramza's father, adopted Delita and his sister Tietra into the family after their parents had died to what we consider the Black Plague. The two were close and entered the same military academy in order to become knights of status. But tragedy begins when Delita, Tietra, and Ramza are caught in the crossfires of a rebel faction and the Order of the Northern Sky. Tietra, Delita's sister, has been kidnapped by the rebel faction and was told that all efforts would be put in place to ensure her safety. However, this was not the case. The truth of the matter was to use his sister as a scapegoat in luring the rebel faction into a corner and killing her if need be. She was thrown away due to her commoner status. Filled with sorrow and rage, Delita decided to rise up and break down the current nobility and fashion it into a system that didn't create victims at the cause of a status. Through multiple allegiances and acts of deception, the youth climbs the ladder of power, working his way towards the throne through the use of Ovelia. This is just a summary of the story without getting into specific details and spoilers. It's complex, but for all of the right reasons, and motivates the player to continue, just to see where the story leads. For those not familiar with Tactics Turn-Based Combat, here is a simplified explanation of how it works. For starters, you have a movement phase. Your movement is based on your selected character's move stat. If you have a 4 move stat, you'll be able to move 4 squares on normal terrain. And if you need to go to a different height, it's factored into another stat called jump. If your jump is 3 and your height you're jumping is 4, you won't be able to reach that distance and will often have to move around the obstacle. Your turns are also determined by your speed stat, which affects how often you get to act. To explain it properly, say your enemy has 5 speed and you have 20 speed. Because of your speed, you would get 3 to 4 turns before your enemy would get to act. Secondly, you have your act phase. Depending on your class, you'll have a unique skill that is specific to that job. If you're a knight, you have skills that break your enemy's equipment or stats. If you're a black mage, you have offensive magic. White mages have restorative magic, and so on. You can opt to normally attack or use one of these skills, though depending on the type of skill, it may have a charge time which takes a certain amount of turns before it goes off. The best way to use charge attacks is to keep an eye on who you're attacking and see when their turn will occur in correspondence to your attack. Or, there are some that act immediately and dole out their effects without the worry of the enemy moving. After that, your phase is over and it moves on to the next character and the process begins anew. This continues until you meet your objective, which can be one of many things. It may ask that you defeat the enemies on the map, defeat a certain person, or even protect an ally. It's simple once you get into it, but the game gets more difficult as time goes on. While we're somewhat on topic, let's talk about the job system in this game. You have a class selector known as the job system. This mechanic is your customization of the game. You can choose to be any class at any time outside of battle. You want to be a Black Mage one battle, then a Summoner the next? You can do that. And through each battle, as you gain experience, you'll also gain JP, known as job points. And with that, you can use your JP to redeem skills and passive traits in the menu. As you unlock more jobs and get their skills, you can apply your older skills to your characters when selecting a new job. You get the class's skill set put to your menu, but you also have the option of choosing a secondary skill set and using it in battle alongside your main skill. It adds a lot of customization to battle and allows for a more enjoyable experience. It also allows you the freedom to experiment with many different jobs and get a feel for what you find to be more enjoyable. The characters in Final Fantasy Tactics are most likely one of the more developed parts of this title. For the purpose of this review, I'm going to talk about certain key characters that drive the story forward. Ramza is a noble from the House of Beul. He is seen as the worst of 4 siblings due to his stance on virtue versus political good. Because of his flaw, he pushes himself to fight so as to uphold his name with pride, though he abandons this line of thought when he learns that a name has no meaning if it is used in vain, and begins to fight for true virtue, a person who fights for the many and not the few. He's easily a character one can reflect upon. We want to be the hero who helps out everyone, even though it may seem impossible, and gives the player a sense of immersion as we continue through Ramza's daunting tale. Even when branded a heretic to the people, Ramza didn't let this stop him from doing his best to help those in need, even if it meant that his actions would never be recognized. Delita Hero. Having been born into a poor family, Delita struggles with the social normalities in place in Ivalice. It's made more apparent when he and his sister Tietra are adopted into the Beul family and are treated unfairly due to their lower class. However, through the hardships, Delita is still a very honorable person and believes that no matter what happens, the end justifies the means. He isn't one for manipulation, but if need be, he will use it against his foes if it aids his cause of overthrowing the current nobility. Though it's not to say he is ruthless, oh no, he's far from it. Delita is the type often found to show mercy to people who are incidentally caught up in his schemes, and wishes to not create such situations when he rules the kingdom in the future. To his enemies, however, Delita is sly and has no qualms of double-crossing his alliances to get what he wants. He will create allegiances with multiple factions with full intent of overthrowing them when their usefulness ends. This is the type of character that we tend to get frustrated with. We know that they mean good, but their actions are often in contrast with what we believe to be just, and often has us questioning if they really have what's best in mind. There are also many side characters in this game, but it would take far too long to cover them all, and choosing 1 or 2 would do the game injustice. Everyone has a side story that helps develop their personalities and even adds to the game's story as a whole, and it's worth to explore. Also, as a fun homage to Final Fantasy VII, XII, and Tactics A2, Square added a few of its characters into the game, such as Cloud, Balthier, and Luso. Though they have little story behind them, they are nice additions to your team because of their unique skill sets, and it's entertaining to have such characters fight alongside you. Keeping to the theme of Final Fantasy Tactics, it goes to say that the music in this game reflects the story well. It's dark and mysterious, and adds a sense of atmosphere that blends well with the game's complexity. Though it goes without saying that when the game decides to let up on the seriousness and become lighthearted, the music transitions well and doesn't feel jarring in the least. Each soundtrack that was made for this game was placed well, and there isn't a single track that I find annoying or repetitive. Even now, I catch myself humming the boss and battle themes. It's time to jump into the grid of this review, the flaws. And even though Tactics is a great game, it's not without its issues. For new players, Final Fantasy Tactics has a difficulty curve that jumps up and down as you progress throughout the story. In Chapter 1, it starts with Dorter Trade City and Rat Cellar, and in Chapter 2, it's Lionel Castle Arc. There are many other instances I could list, but the point is that it happens at random, and it can sometimes deter those not used to Tactics-style gameplay. Another issue is how grindy the game can get when you hit a roadblock. There are some times where you need to amass a large amount of job points in order to learn certain skills, and it can detract from the pacing of the game quickly if you're stuck and need to get anywhere between 500 to 700 job points. This isn't always the case, but there are a few points in the game where I found myself grinding because I didn't know of a certain fight and would get trucked by it easily. Something else that would annoy me and actually lead me to restarting the game completely is being locked into a scenario without warning and being unable to continue with the story or even backtrack. For this example, I will be talking about an instance in Chapter 3. When moving through Chapter 3, you eventually make your way to a place called Riovanes Castle. This is possibly one of the hardest parts of the game, and to top it off, when you start the series of battles, there is no warning about being stuck in the castle as you progress. Oftentimes, I see people save after a fight, and when they reach Wygriff, this is where that save becomes a regret. If you're unable to beat Wygriff due to a lack of skill or experience, and you save before this fight, you cannot leave the castle and grind. You are stuck here, period. This means that if you're completely stuck and didn't make a safety save, you had to start the entire game from Chapter 1 again, losing hours upon hours of progress, making this one of the biggest deal breakers of this title. And now we've reached what I think is my favorite part of the review, the pros and cons of Final Fantasy Tactics. On the pro side, if I had to summarize its good parts, I would boast about its great soundtrack, amazing dialogue and great storytelling, relatable characters, and an enjoyable and customizable battle system. On the con side, however, I would have to say that its weaknesses are its learning curve and sporadic difficulties, game-ending scenarios that, without prior knowledge, can end a file and force a restart, and that it's intensively grindy at certain points in the game. Final Fantasy Tactics is an enjoyable and difficult experience. It tries your patience as you learn how to deal with challenging situations, and requires you to be cautious of your actions, leading you to strategize effectively. It also tells a story filled with themes of politics and virtue, which rings loud to today. It's a timeless classic, and though it's not for everyone, it's one of the top strategy turn-based style games I've played to date. And if you're a fan of these types of games, another series you might find enjoyable is the Disgaea series. It's another strategy turn-based game, but it's got a cartoony and comedic style about it that often breaks the fourth wall and is very aware of itself. It's a fun play and definitely worth your time. And that about wraps up this review of Final Fantasy Tactics. It's a finely crafted game with an unforgettable story. It leaves me satisfied, and it's without a doubt that I'll find myself playing this title again. That I can say for sure. Hey everyone, I'm TheKasaPuppy, and thank you for watching. If you like this review, please leave a like or subscribe to my channel for more videos. I upload a new review every other Tuesday, and if you have any recommendations for games to review, please comment below and I'll take your suggestions into great consideration.